Hey everyone, Mark Carpenter here again with Clearly Agile, and today I want to give you a quick overview of how to facilitate a user story mapping session. So I'm just going to give you a high-level view of what this activity looks like. I'll quickly run through the steps that you want to take to complete this exercise because it really is an important activity if you want to kick your project off on the right foot. So let's dive right in. So what is user story mapping? Simply put, it's just a way of capturing your requirements. It's very visual and it gives you a nice high level view of the project all the way down to that user story level view. Now, with user story mapping, everything is done from the perspective of the user. And then the output can be nicely prioritized, separated into releases, and then given to your teams to put in their backlog and begin cranking through the work. Now, as we go through this, you're going to notice that there's pretty much a pattern of everything starts at a high level and then we break it down into smaller and smaller pieces until we get to that user story level. And then along the way, we're going to use a few techniques to prioritize and separate all this into releases. So now that we have a better idea of what this looks like, let's dive into the steps that you would use to facilitate a user story mapping session. So to start, we want to get everyone on the same page as far as what we're building and who it's for. Now, regrettably, teams sometimes skip this step and dive right into building out those requirements. But unfortunately, that can often lead to missing functionality or prioritizing functionality that we don't really need. So to get that proper start, we first want to define our product vision. Now, this could be as simple as just writing out a sentence that covers why our users would benefit from this project. Essentially, what is that main value we provide? And this is so important because if everyone is not on the same page as far as what true north is for this project, you're going to end up with all kinds of weird functionality that you don't actually need. Next, we want to identify who our users are. Now, you might have different user types. So some projects could have a buyer and a seller. Some might have a basic user and a paid user. Others might have an admin who needs to interact with customers behind the scenes. So you want to build out for that internal user as well. Because if we don't cover all these different user roles, then we could miss important pieces of functionality. So next, we're going to take those user roles you came up with, and we're going to come up with high-level activities that those users are going to need in order to use your product. Now, these high-level activities are sometimes referred to as epics. Now, when you're coming up with these epics, you want to think through the journey that that user is going to take through your product. Now, remember, this isn't a heavily detailed thing. These are just high-level components that they're going to need. Next, we're going to go to each one of those activities that we came up with, and we're going to break it down into a smaller group known as features. Now, again, these features aren't heavily detailed, but when put together, they should equal that activity that you came up with. So let me give you an example. Let's say your activity is to create a user account. Now, that's your high-level activity. Now, we might break that down into smaller features like create a sign-up page, a login page, and a profile page. So as you can see, we have that high-level activity. We broke it down into smaller features, but we still haven't gone into a lot of detail yet. Okay, so next we're going to take those features we came up with and we're going to break those down into user stories. So here's where you can get into some of the details. Now, just like our features added up into our epics, we want our user stories to add up into that feature. So in my previous example, one of the features I mentioned was a login page. So the user stories that we could break that feature down into might be something like allow users to sign in with a username and password, or if a user forgets their password, allow them to reset it. Anything that's going to add up to that feature. And it's important when doing this part of the exercise that we're focused more so on getting just a few stories under each feature instead of getting a lot of stories under only a couple features and then have a few features that don't have any stories. So a common expression here is think an inch deep, but a mile wide. Okay, so now that we have our user stories, we want to assign a business value to each one. This is going to be an indicator we use when it comes time to prioritize. So what we're going to do is go to each user story and assign a business value of high, medium, or low to each one. And we can do this by simply putting an H, an M, or an L somewhere visually on the user story itself. Next, we're going to have our Scrum teams come in, and they're going to size each of these user stories based on the amount of effort it would take to complete it. And we could use any of the standard scales like the Fibonacci sequence or t-shirt sizing, anything you would normally use. And now that we're armed with the information of how much effort a story will take to complete, and the business value that it provides, we can use that information to prioritize. Okay, so now we have the information we need in order to prioritize our user stories and to group them into those releases. Now, when it comes time to prioritize, there's a lot of techniques you could use, but I would recommend checking out one called the Moscow method, where essentially you're going to go story by story and you're going to determine if they're a must have, a should have, a could have, or a would like. And then you use that criteria in order to prioritize your backlog. Now, once it is prioritized, you want to break it into those releases. And here it's important that that first release, you just take the minimum functionality needed, not with any of the bells and whistles, and make that your first release. This is called your MVP or your minimum viable product. So once you determine what's that functionality, just draw a horizontal line below it, and all the user stories above that are going to be your first release. And then you can do the same thing below there to come up with the following releases, just using that horizontal line to show what's in those subsequent releases. All right, that's it. I hope this gives you a good overview of what a user story mapping session really looks like. Now, I know there's a lot of steps in here, so if you want a written version of this, be sure to go to clearlyagile.com, check out Om Patel's blog post on advanced user story mapping. Now, let's keep in mind, this was just an overview. Each of these steps have their own best practices and techniques that will help better the outcome of your story mapping session. So be sure to take that deeper dive into these techniques. And if you want to learn them from the pros who use them every day, be sure to head to clearlyagile.com/workshops or use the QR code on your screen. For a deeper dive into this topic, I would recommend our workshop on advanced user story writing. You can also have Clearly Agile come in and facilitate your next user story mapping session in order to kick off your project on the right foot. As always, thank you for watching. Stay agile.